Time now, 7 minutes to 8, and let's talk more about the rising cost of living with the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, who's calling for emergency legislation at Holyrood to deal with this crisis. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
If Scottish Labour wants to help people deal with the cost of living crisis, why not pay council staff more? Why did your council leaders reject a 5% pay offer which was tabled by the SNP at COSLA?
Look, I want us to give as good a pay offer as we can and work closely with our trade union colleagues. It was clear that trade union colleagues wouldn't support 3.5%. We still don't know whether they'll support 5%. But what our view is that rather than the increase in that pay offer coming from within existing local government budgets, which are already under pressure and stretched, and meaning more cuts to local services, that we think more resource needs to come from the Scottish Government to meet those pay demands. And that's a conversation we'll continue to have via COSLA, obviously closely with our trade union colleagues, but also making demands of the Scottish Government.
Well, let's see what you'd like to see happen at the Scottish Parliament level. A rent freeze, a ban on winter evictions, cancelling school meals debt and having the cost of train tickets are amongst your suggestions for emergency legislation to Holyrood. Where's the money coming from to pay for all of it?
Well, I think, first of all, there has to be a recognition that this is a national emergency that we should view just like on the scale of COVID-19. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is going to be like it was with COVID-19, where you saw a confection that we'd never seen before right across our country, making us lose so many lives. But let's be honest, if we don't confront this crisis, then lives could be lost as we push more and more people into poverty. And therefore, what we're calling for is, yes, demanding that the UK government does more. And we set out earlier this week what more we think they can do, stopping the rise in August, for example, meaning households can save over £1,000, more action on prepayment meters, more action to support businesses. But I also think that the Scottish Government should be doing more right now as well.
Like what?
And that is, for example, why in the details of the Cost of Living Emergency Act that we're calling for, as you mentioned, the rent freeze already. We're also talking about what more we can do, for example, a water charge rebate. We know there's hundreds of millions of pounds sitting in the Scottish water reserves. We can use that to give money back to households right now. We know, for example, that there was an evictions ban during COVID. We should be looking at that right now. That doesn't cost a penny. That is.
So you're not going to support any landlords who would have to put in place, rent freezes, or for instance?
No, to be fair, my colleague Mercedes Villalba, who brought this forward at a previous form of legislation, did suggest caveats within that, which was around supporting landlords that were in financial hardship. But the principle being that we had a rent freeze, which starts at 9 months, which could be extended to 2 years. After a review after 9 months. You asked a question about how it would be paid for. We're expecting, first of all, we have a reserve of £241 million in the Scottish Government budget. That's £41 million up from where it was before. We know there's a lack of transparency around where money goes or where money is stored by the Scottish Government. So we're calling for a genuine emergency budget review, like Nicola Sturgeon has suggested, that gets the eyes open on where there is money available and what more support can go to people right now, rather than hoarding money for later down the road. The rainy day has arrived. We need to support people. And we're also expecting to see not the downturn in tax revenues that was predicted, but actually now a correction saying that there'll be more money going into the Scottish Government coffers over the course of the next year. We think we should preload that money to support people through this cost of living crisis.
So you don't think there are any areas of Scottish Government spending that would need to be cut in order to pay for extra help to be provided now?
Well, the presumption is not making a cut, but if you're finding waste, then you're cutting the waste, and that therefore means you're putting money into supporting people right now. So we have set out a package that, in our paper we put out today, demonstrates how we pay for it. But I actually think we can go even beyond that if we can identify those areas of government waste. We can identify those pots of money that the government is sitting on for announcements further down the road. Let's instead identify where the money exists and get support to families right now. And we're willing to work with the Scottish Government to make that a reality.
So you said essentially you're saying that they're hiding money for political use.
Well, they've been hiding money. It's happened year on year on year. Every year we see it happen at a budget time where the Scottish Government sets a budget. They say that there is no more money to spend, and therefore any other suggestions has to come from cuts. And then they manage to pull money out of a hat in order to do a deal with the Greens to get their budget through. They've done it every single year for as long as I can remember. Let's stop that tactic of hiding pots of money. Let's instead open up the books, get directly to see transparency, and let's make sure we're using every penny to support people across the country. And if they do that, they'll have our support. But this requires an emergency response, not governments demanding something of other governments, although that is important, but also acting themselves in the interest of the Scottish people.
I'm interested in your proposals for rail fares. You want to have them. We know that there are fewer passengers using trains. We know that fuel costs are increasing. How do you expect ScotRail to pay drivers an extra 5% and possibly other ScotRail staff perhaps more than that if you have their income?
Well, we've said that policy would cost around £66 million. We've identified how that can be paid for in the paper today. But actually, I believe that if you reduce rail fares, well, as I said, we've set out in terms of the reserve funds that are available there, because it's a temporary halving of the rail fares we're talking about. We've talked about the increase of tax revenues. This is a policy that costs £66 million. We've identified well over £250 million that is available to the Scottish Government through money that's either in reserves or increases in tax revenues that are expected over the next year. But the important point here is this is partly about addressing the cost of commuting crisis, the cost of living crisis, getting cheaper for people to get onto public transport, but it's also about changing behaviours that helps us with the climate emergency. And I honestly believe if we have rail fares, we get more people onto our railways, we have more passengers, and that helps us address both those crises at the same time. Whereas at the moment, we're seeing rail fares rise. So not only do I want to see a halving over the course of the next few months, but I want to see a commitment from the Scottish Government that there will not be an increase next year in rail fares either, because you have a Scottish Government that's publishing papers saying this is what other countries around the world are doing, reducing the rail fares, without actually doing it right here in Scotland.
There's another rail strike tomorrow. There's another rail strike tomorrow by workers who are after a higher than 5% pay rise. Colleagues in London in the shadow cabinet have been told they don't need to appear on picket lines to show their support. What about you? Will you be out on the picket lines tomorrow?
Well, I'll be speaking to rail workers tomorrow. Whether I go down or not is yet to be seen. I'll need to look at my diary at that. But one thing I'm absolutely clear about is I am not shy about being on a picket line and showing solidarity with my colleagues. Even if it goes
against Sir Keir Starmer?
Look, I set what happens in Scotland. I've been out on picket lines. I've been out with CWU workers. I've been out with RMT workers. I've been out with ASLEF workers. I was out the weekend with USDA workers. I'll be out supporting Unison workers. I'll be out supporting Unite workers who are going on strike around action in Edinburgh and other cities around the country because they're not getting a fair pay settlement. That's partly about demonstrating that these workers don't want to strike. The unions don't want to strike, but they need government action. But it's also about politicians listening to workers' concerns and trying to address them.
We must leave it there. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, thank you very much indeed. And we'll hear from the Scottish Government in just about 10-15 minutes.
It's 13 minutes past 8. Well, an emergency cost of energy summit is being called by the First Minister as inflation this morning hits the record of 10.1%. Let's speak to Ivan McKee, who is the Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism and Enterprise. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's look specifically at this energy summit that the First Minister is calling for. What specific ideas is the government putting forward?
Well, we absolutely recognise that the cost crisis, its impact on individuals, families and businesses, as we've just heard, right across the country. And the First Minister's taken the step to call together the energy companies, very importantly, alongside that, other organisations who understand and work very closely with individuals who are most impacted. So the Poverty Alliance, Energy Action Scotland, and I saw you had Fraser from Energy Action Scotland on this morning, to explore what options are possible to help the energy companies understand the impact that the current situation is having on very, very vulnerable individuals and others right across society.
Fraser Scott from Energy Action Scotland told us he's hoping for concrete action to relieve the problems. So what concrete action is the government going to suggest?
In terms of the summit, so one of the actions we've taken is to call the summit to pull the organisations in together to go through what they can do to help. But in terms of what we're doing, we've indicated that we're taking forward steps to look at the budget, to understand what other money is there, to have and John Swinney was on talking about this earlier in the week, to look at what possibility there is to free up additional cash to be able to support the most vulnerable, on top of all the work and funding we've already put in place. And remember, Scottish Government's put £3 billion into support the most vulnerable through the current cost
So what specific
crisis.
measures would you think could come from this?
Well, see, we need to understand what money is available, and we're going through that process just now.
Well, Anna Sarwar was on earlier. He says the Scottish Government's got a reserve of £241 million in the Scottish budget, so that's the money that's available.
For somebody that was in business, Anna Sarwar's not understanding the numbers very well. Obviously,
so there's no reserve.
Well, the Scottish budget is running a budget of tens of billions of pounds. So clearly, there needs to be money there to smooth things over from over different periods of time and make sure we don't run out of money at any particular point in time. So of course, there's money there.
So that £241 million is not there to be spent.
That number moves around obviously as we go through the year and spend money on different aspects.
So what is the figure at the moment then in terms of what you're looking at?
See, that's the whole point of the emergency budget, to have a look and see exactly what the position is at the moment, because that's obviously moving as we go through the financial year, and to understand what scope there is, because some of these things obviously are demand-led spend. Other revenue numbers, of course, will move depending on the current economic situation. So to assess exactly what's there, that's the point of that emergency budget, and see what money is possible.
Anna Sarwar's put forward some ideas. He talks about a rent freeze for those who are seeing their rents increases, a ban on winter evictions, a sort of ban that we saw during the COVID situation, cancelling school meal debt, halving the cost of train tickets. Are these measures that you think are worth exploring? There
are measures that we are looking at. Now, we're not looking. I'm not going to obviously commit here just now to government policy. We've got to go through the proper process on that. But we're absolutely having a look at all measures that could make an impact to address the current situation.
But like a rent freeze, for instance, a ban on winter evictions, that's not something that would cost the Scottish Government any money whatsoever. That's a measure that could be put in place to protect people right now.
As I said, the process that we're going through at the moment is looking at the emergency budget.
But do you need to speed this up?
Available.
Do you understand the urgency?
That's why I used the word emergency. This is happening very quickly. We're talking days here. Of course, Parliament's back in a couple of weeks at the start of September, which is necessary for anything we need to do on the legislative front if that was required. But we're absolutely looking at that. The summit's happening in a matter of days. The work is happening as we speak, and we'll be bringing forward measures very, very quickly. But it's very important also, as I say, to recognise what we've done, the £3 billion that we've already put in. Many measures that aren't happening south of the border. The Scottish Government's been very proactive in that regard, but also very importantly to recognise the things we can't do. We don't control VAT, as Stephen Leckie was asking for. We don't control immigration, that he was also asking for from a business perspective. We don't control the energy policy and how that's set by the UK Government, and we're calling on them to take steps around about the cap.
It's interesting you're able to give me a list of the things you can't do. But
well, as I said, I can give you a list of the things I can give you a list of things we've already done, around about concessionary travel, around about the food insecurity, fuel insecurity fund.
What about school meals for all primary school children? Because of course you promised that in your last manifesto, and you said that would be delivered by August 2022. It hasn't happened yet.
We're spending an extra £42 million on full provision for primary 4 and primary 5 at the moment, and we're rolling it out to primary 6 and primary 7. The reason that hasn't happened yet is because there isn't the capacity in schools to be able to provide those meals. Local authorities came back to us and says we can't roll this out yet because we don't have the kitchen facilities. So there's another £30 million.
Is this not something you looked at before you put it in your manifesto?
Well, it's local authorities that deliver that. Okay, so we provide.
So you put it in your manifesto without asking them whether they could deliver on it.
The funding for it, and they've come back and says, well, we can't roll it out as quickly.
So where did the figure of August 22? But where did the figure of August 22 come from then? In that case, given that you couldn't deliver it,
commitment in terms of the funding to go in to support that. Now, as I say, the delivery of that is with local authorities. If some local authorities hadn't been able to deliver to that time scale, then they've come back and told us that's the situation. So just to be clear, though, in England, this is a provision for primary 1, 2 and 3. In Scotland, it's already a provision for primaries 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And we're rolling out primary 6 and 7. The money's there for that. We're rolling that out over the course of this financial year. That's another example of where Scotland's leading the way and doing more than is happening south of the border.
So having promised by August 2022 that all primary 1 to primary 7 children would get free breakfast and lunch, when will that actually be delivered?
That'll roll out through the course of the next financial year, and I've just said that the school year.
So it might be the end of next school year before some get this?
Sorry, through the course of this school year that's just started, this will be rolled out for primary 6 and 7. Primary 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 already get it. There's more money going in, £30 million, I said, to make the upgrade the kitchen provision, to provide that to make sure local authorities can do that. And again, very importantly, that means we'll be providing it for primaries 1 to 7. South of the border, it's only primaries 1 to 3. And I think that goes back to, some of the nonsense, frankly, we heard from the Tory debate last night.
Well, I wanted to ask you
about how Scotland performs. On this, as in many, many, many other areas, Scotland is performing better and doing more.
And in terms of energy, Liz Truss was talking about using the resources of the North Sea to better effect. Of course, the Conservatives are proposing small nuclear and also fracking. She's talking about engaging with the Scottish Government on these issues. You, of course, have set your stall against many of these things. Is it time to look again?
We want to use the resources of the North Sea, and that's absolutely what we're focused on in terms of renewable energy. We've got 25% of Europe's wind energy in Scotland. We're not rolling that out fast enough.
What about taking more gas out of the North Sea, which has been suggested by some analysts?
Well, the move to net zero is hugely important, and the way we're going to do this fastest and most effectively is by accelerating the rollout of realising the energy from Scotland's offshore wind potential. That is the big prize. That's what we need to focus on.
Fracking,
and the UK
small
government,
nuclear?
The offshore wind is the biggest number, the 25 gigawatt that's going to come from Scotland over the next few years. We need to accelerate that, get the Scottish supply chain supporting that, which is happening, and get the developers to roll it out faster. But the UK government isn't helping that because they control energy policy in terms of grid connection charges, contracts for difference and other aspects they control. Then that is slowing up what needs to happen in the North Sea in terms of offshore energy. And that is another reason, and I'm going to say it because it's really, really important in terms of immigration, in terms of energy policy, in terms of social security control, in terms of controlling the full tax system, in terms of controlling VAT. Those are among some of the many reasons why Scotland needs to be an independent country.
Ivan McKee, Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism and Enterprise, thank you very much for your time this morning.